Good morning. Thank you all for coming here early this morning. We appreciate it. My name is Dan Furmansky. I'm representing the Marijuana Policy Project. This is my wonderful colleague, Sarah Love, with the ACLU of Maryland. And today we are here to discuss an important public policy issue, and that is ending the criminalization and prohibition of marijuana in Maryland. The ACLU of Maryland and the Marijuana Policy Project represent today a large and expanding coalition of organizations who have come together to form the Marijuana Policy Coalition of Maryland. Our diverse voices represent the majority of Marylanders who support an end to failed marijuana prohibition policies in Maryland. Over the past few months, there have been two independent polls that have shown a majority of Marylanders believe that the responsible use of marijuana by adults should be legal and regulated like alcohol. And an overwhelming number of Marylanders, more than 2/3, say that we should end the criminalization and criminal penalties of possession of marijuana by adults. Now, Maryland is not out of the mainstream. We actually are trending with the rest of the country. Polls consistently are showing that a majority of people in this country believe that the more than 100 million Americans who have admitted to using marijuana in their lifetime should not be penalized and treated like criminals for choosing a substance that is safer than alcohol.
Thank you. As Dan said, my name is Sarah Love. I'm with the ACLU of Maryland. Implementation of marijuana possession laws have fallen most harshly on communities of color. I think each of you has in your packet a report by the ACLU of Maryland that shows, despite comparable rates of use, Marylanders who are African American are 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than those who are white. It is time to end these failed policies of marijuana prohibition. Thank you. It is my honor today to introduce you to the sponsors of the Marijuana Control Act of 2014. We have with us Senator Jamie Raskin and Delegate Curt Anderson. We will also be hearing from Major Neill Franklin of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And I also want to introduce 2 other honored guests we have with us, Delegate Heather Mazier and Delegate John Carden. Thank you all so much for coming. Jamie?
Okay. Sarah, thank you very much, and thanks to Dan and Sarah for organizing the press conference. I'm delighted to be here with Curt Anderson, who has been the central leader in this legislation over the last several years, and with my colleagues, Delegate Mazier, Delegate Carden, and all of the distinguished activists and analysts who've assembled today for the introduction of this legislation. Look, we've got 3 possibilities facing us with respect to marijuana policy in our state. One is continuation of the current regime. The second is decriminalization. And the third is regulation and taxation, which is what we're here to support today. The vast majority of Marylanders have come to the realization that the current war on drugs is failing with respect to marijuana. It's a complete flop. Kids in our state and across the country say that it is easy or very easy to get marijuana. More than 80% of them say every year in polls that it's very easy or easy to get marijuana, and much easier to get marijuana than to get alcohol. So what are we doing? We are criminalizing generations of our own people for doing something that our last several presidents have readily admitted to having done themselves. We are driving up the cost in a way that enriches the drug dealers, the drug gangs, and international organized crime and the Mexican drug cartels. And we are wasting law enforcement resources that could be spent and should be spent on serious violent crimes and white-collar crimes in our state. So the path of continuation of the status quo, I think, is a failed and doomed path. And it's one that the vast majority of our people reject. So then we come to the proposition of decriminalization. This is what passed out of the Senate overwhelmingly last year without any real organizing behind it. And decriminalization means that we remove the criminal penalties and we make it a $100 fine to possess small amounts of marijuana. And that accords with the very powerful moral intuition people have that we should not be criminalizing our own population, we should not be committing a war against our own population, and we should not be ruining the life chances of tens of thousands of young people a year in our state for doing what half of America has admitted doing. Okay. The problem with decriminalization is that it leaves in place the basic dynamics of criminal control over the supply of marijuana and the market in marijuana. Our goal is to kick the drug dealers out of the state. And there's one way to do it, which is to regulate and tax marijuana. Let the government take over the whole process. That's how we kicked bootleggers out of the state. We said that the government was going to regulate alcohol. When we ended prohibition, that's how we kicked organized crime out of the liquor industry. Okay, so decriminalization is a big step in the right direction, but we don't think it's there yet. We are here to stand for the proposition that we can kick the drug dealers out of the state by regulating and taxing marijuana. And in the process, we will be able to devote law enforcement resources towards serious unsolved crimes like homicide in our state. We will be able to pick up more than $100 million a year in public revenue that we need for purposes like alcohol and drug treatment for our people, like pre-K, like school construction and renovation that we need so badly in Montgomery County. There's a whole host of public purposes that we could be channeling that money into. At the same time, we will strike a blow against the Mexican drug cartels and the organized crime figures that have taken over the international trade in marijuana. Just finished reading a book called Narcoland by a Mexican journalist called Anabel Hernandez, who describes the way that the traffic in marijuana has brought billions of dollars to the illegal underground economy of Mexico, built up the power of the drug cartels to the point where they have corrupted cops, prosecutors, judges, all the way up to the president of Mexico. And they have lost more than 75,000 people in the drug war over the last decade. We saw a glimpse of what that would look like in America in the takeover of the Baltimore City Jail by drug dealers who used their profits and their money to pay off the guards with condos and cars and cash. Okay, so we want to disengage from the failed policy of prohibition. We want to put the government in charge of regulating this so only adults age 21 and up will be able to access it. We will crack down on any grown-up who dares to sell to children in our state. We will throw the book at them and we will put them in jail. Because we want to keep this away from children, but we want to allow grown-ups to make their own decisions. So I am thrilled that we are having a serious conversation in the state of Maryland about what to do about marijuana. It's part of a conversation taking place across the country and across the world, and I'm very proud to stand with my colleague, Curt Anderson, who has been the leader in Annapolis on this, and with that, I will introduce Curt.
Thank you, Jamie. First of all, let me thank all of our partners today, including the ACLU, the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, obviously the Marijuana Project, and one particular person I want to thank, or really especially, is Major Neill Franklin. Neill I met when he was a state trooper back in the 1980s. He was a regular trooper. He just had one stripe on his arm. And he worked patrol. He did the things that you need to do in Maryland to work up the ranks. As an African American, it was a hard thing to do. But he was a Maryland State Police trooper. Trust me, ladies and gentlemen, he was hard as nails. He still is. But he's been doing this he worked his way up till major in the Maryland State Police. It's not an easy thing to do. But with his many, many years of experience in policing, in the criminal justice system, he came to the same conclusion that I came to, and probably around the same time, that we have failed with regard to any kind of control over marijuana. people say, well, what's the message that you're sending to the children, or how do you deal with the fact this is such a bad drug? Well, we've actually looked at these questions, and we found that the answer to controlling, as Professor Raskin just said, controlling the sale and the use of marijuana lies in us controlling it ourselves. It's simple. Now, Neill will come up and give you some examples about how cigarettes and alcohol use amongst teenagers, young people, has gone down once states have taken active control over it. And I think all of you in the press can just borrow from your own personal experiences. You've seen advertisements disappear for alcohol in magazines and newspapers. Certainly now there's only beer ads on TV, but there's plenty of them. You very seldom see any more cigarette ads on television. That all goes to the fact that the state is controlling the message. All we want to do is to control the message here. And one of the messages that have been sent out in the past is how dangerous marijuana is. Well, we don't think so. We've looked at studies over the years, not just studies from the 50s, 60s, or 70s, but studies that have been done consistently in the last 10 years. And these are not just polls. People think that, well, we should have marijuana or we shouldn't have marijuana. These are studies to show exactly what the addictive nature is or is not, and what the effect on society is. Marijuana, along with alcohol, back in the 1920s and 1930s, was prohibited. It was prohibited. We fought a long 13-year war against prohibition, or at least the war was fought by organized crime, and a majority of the states ratified a constitutional amendment saying we were wrong. We should not be prohibiting alcohol. And I think we were wrong about marijuana as well. William Randolph Hearst spent a sizable amount of his fortune trying to protect his we call it not the wood, but forest, his forest concerns, because he used paper. He used wood to make paper. At the time, industrial hemp was also competing with paper, and he did not want his concerns threatened. So there was a targeted effort to destroy the image of marijuana in the country 85 years ago without any opposition. He had every newspaper he could use. What we're trying to do is simply let folks know that marijuana is not the addictive drug that you've been led to believe. Certainly not as addictive as cigarettes or alcohol. And marijuana is not the gateway drug that you've been led to believe. In fact, it's a gateway drug in a totally different respect. Once a child and once a young person gets an arrest, okay, first arrest PBJ, second arrest probation, third arrest though jail time, none of which can be expunged. When you have a record that can't be expunged, then you can't get into schools, you can't get jobs, you can't get some housing in some cases. So what is a young person to do if you can't get a job, you can't get into school, and you can't better your life? We don't want them to have the only option of being a street dealer available for them. So that's part of what we're doing today. I've taken long enough. I do want to thank all of y'all for being here today. I know Sheila Hickson was arriving a little bit late, but I'll now turn it over to Major Franklin.
Thank you, Delegate, Senator. And thank you for coming. Thanks, everyone, for coming to hear this important information and be a part of this, which is very important. As Delegate Anderson said, I've got 34 years in law enforcement experience, retired from the Maryland State Police in 1999 as a major. Most of that time was spent in either criminal investigation or narcotics enforcement as a regional commander for the Bureau of Drug and Criminal Enforcement. I also was the commander of training for the Maryland State Police before I then moved on to the Baltimore Police Department, where I was the commander of training there for 4 years. From working undercover to commanding those task forces, I've seen a lot. I've done a lot, most of which I'm proud of, but now that I understand this issue regarding prohibition and the problems that it causes for our communities, and communities of color most importantly, The crime, I was about public safety. I've committed my life to public safety, improving public safety. But to find out that prohibition is actually counterproductive to public safety after you've devoted 3 decades to it is a hard pill to swallow. But we have to swallow it. We have no choice if we want better and safer communities. This is really part 2 to a really bad movie. Part 1 was alcohol prohibition in the 1920s. And we ended that after only 13 years because we saw and we recognized that it didn't work. Prohibition does not work. I have a brief statement to read because if I just talk, I will get emotional and I'll go on forever because there is so much to talk about regarding this issue. So let me just get through this real quick.
Take your time.
Sure. We're soon to discover just how serious our lawmakers are about improving public safety, making marijuana less available to our children, and how important ending a discriminatory process of arrest that has devastated the black and brown communities of our nation. We're about to see just how serious they are about changing this. So I'm referring to the support that they should give for legalizing marijuana, controlling marijuana, regulating marijuana, because you cannot do either of those, control it or regulate it, unless you legalize it. I believe that Marylanders of the 1920s were smart enough to see that the policy of prohibition was far more harmful to the community than alcohol use could ever be. My first point of public safety. We know that the illegal marijuana business is big business. It generates at least 60% of all the illicit proceeds from the drug trade. This translates into street violence as drug dealers compete for that valuable market share. Neighborhoods, street corners. With that money, they buy expensive guns, used to manage the business, and the proceeds also go on to further other criminal enterprises. Delegate Anderson and Senator Raskin talked about the Baltimore City Jail and the BGF. As police shift their focus away from low-level marijuana arrests, they can use those limited man hours and funds to focus upon rapes, robberies, assaults, domestic violence, murder, crimes against our children. If you go back 4 decades at the beginning of the drug war, we solved 9 out of 10 murders across this nation. And today, because we have been misguided, we've lost focus on what we should be doing as law enforcement, and that's crimes of violence. Today, we solve only 6 out of 10 murders nationwide. And we have technology. We have DNA. We should be solving more. What about reducing marijuana access for our children? And this is extremely important, especially to me. A recent Columbia study reveals that it's easier for juveniles to buy marijuana than beer. But you know what? You don't need that study. You know young people. All you have to do is ask young people, and they'll tell you that it's easier to buy marijuana than beer. I've never had anyone come up to me and say, you know what, I just can't find any weed today. Okay, it's just very difficult to find. I don't know where to go or where to look for it. It's very easy to find. So why is this so? First, drug dealers do not ask for ID in an effort to prove that the buyer is an adult. They will sell to anyone. They don't care if you have family issues. They don't care if you have psychological issues. They don't care if you have money issues. They just don't care. That is their number one goal, to get you to buy marijuana. As an after fact, as a drug dealer, It is not just my number one goal to get you to buy, but it's to get you to buy as much as you can, as quickly as I can sell it to you. Drug dealers recruit and hire children to sell marijuana to other children in our schools. As an adult, as most of us are here, we cannot walk into our local schools, our neighborhood schools, and sell anything. We wouldn't get 50 feet beyond the door before we're confronted by another adult. But as a child enrolled in that school, hired by a drug dealer to move his business or her business, it happens every single day. And we have to take control away from these drug dealers who do that. You know, the so-called gateway theory, you know, if you want to be effective in preventing other people, and in this case, people who use marijuana, or our children who happen to get a hold of marijuana, if you want to reduce the possibility of them moving on to harder drugs like heroin, cocaine, crystal meth, then remove them from that environment of the illicit drug trade, of the street corner drug dealer. Provide a safe process, a place such as a legal retail outlet for them to go buy marijuana, and then you remove them from that environment. Because again, as a drug dealer, when I sell you marijuana, I may not even sell you cocaine or heroin. I will give it to you. I'll give you a sample because I want you to use it and I want you to become addicted. Let me wrap it up with this. Our devastated black and brown communities. Marijuana prohibition is the cornerstone of today's racial profiling. The ACLU has provided the numbers for you. I'm sure you all have access to the report, which I see in front of me, regarding the disparity issues. Zero tolerance policing policies play a significant role. Stat-driven policing, policing for dollars. More drug arrests, despite the quality, translate to more federal dollars for our law enforcement community. Because of its unique and distinctive odor, we in law enforcement use marijuana as a core reason for searching and arresting. It's so easy to accomplish this within communities that lack political and economic power. Delegate Anderson talked about what we've been able to do when we move something into an area of regulation and control. For alcohol and tobacco, despite the problems that we currently have with it, because it's regulated and controlled, we've been able to do some things. We've been able to focus on these issues from a health perspective, education, teaching our young people what to do and what not to do, what's dangerous, what's not dangerous, the truth about these products. Tobacco, over the past few decades, we've been able to reduce consumption by about 40%. And we've sent no one to prison. We're having no shootouts in our streets, no drive-by shootings, no running gun battles. And that's what you're able to do. And the similar with alcohol. We talked about alcohol prohibition. There's so much more regarding this, but I want to move on so that the press has an opportunity to ask questions of the folks up here on the dais. I just want to thank you for coming and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you.